am Nat.
And I'm Guy. And this is your home for everything Alberta independence. Let's get into it, Nat.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Happy Friday, everybody. I always forget to say that. But first of all, please don't forget to subscribe. It really does help us out. Thank you so much to everybody that has subscribed. It really does help out. Also, we try to read most, if not all, of your comments live after each segment. The show is divided into segments. And we also have memberships. Thank you so much to all our members.
Well, and I was telling you, we were filming a edited video before the show. And I was like, just record the video. Just say it.
Just do it.
And she kept saying, I can't. And then she finally did it. And she was amazing.
No, not amazing. Yeah. You'll see it soon. Not amazing. But first of all, I will also start by saying hello to Steve Safaro, who says, for some reason I can't bring it up, but says, and with a wave of his hand, Trump makes Carney irrelevant, or more irrelevant than he already was, I will say.
Yeah, absolutely. I've changed the order of some of the segments. We're going to actually put breaking news after Stay Free Alberta because there is an extremely long clip. I was shocked that the CBC actually played. They had a professor of international negotiations completely break down the difference between the Mexican negotiations and the Canadian negotiations.
Basically what we've been saying for the past month and more than a month.
Well, I think Mark Carney overall wins right now because everybody's talking about the deal, but there is no deal. The fact of the matter is he hasn't negotiated the USMCA. What he did was not go into official negotiations, which caused Trump to make a 50% threatened tariff, and then Carney negotiated that 50% down, but completely avoided the actual negotiation that's supposed to be going on with the USMCA, like Mexico is currently conducting. Carney just basically gave up all of his leveraging power and got nothing in return here.
Yes. But also, hello, Anya Zinski says, hi, Nan and Guy, happy Friday. Hello, and thank you for being here. Austin Westwood says, hey, y'all, hello. Silverfeet waving, hello. And David Albert Carlson says, hello, Nan and the Guy from Parkland County.
Well, thank you for everybody for being here.
Yes, so let's start, as you were saying, with Alberta Stay Free.
Sweet home Alberta, where the roots run deep and the money trees grow.
And let's start with this from...
Sorry, my headphones are all messed up here. Okay, I got
Keith
it.
Wilson saying, quote, Canada's premiers admitted Alberta's energy is one of the country's strongest leverage points. The same leverage would give an independent Alberta the upper hand in negotiations over trade pipelines, cooperation, and our future relationship with Canada. Let's watch.
What happened this week was we had President Trump threaten a 50% tariff on select goods. And then we heard a number of premiers, including British Columbia Premier Eby and loudly Premier Doug Ford from Ontario, say that Canada needs to retaliate against the United States. And the tool of retaliation, the power leverage point that he cited and they cited is Alberta's oil. Alberta's oil, they say, is a leverage point that Alberta has tremendous power because of our oil exports. 90% of our exports go to, or 91% of the oil exported in Canada to the United States comes from Alberta. And it's an important source of oil importation to the American economy. So the premiers in other provinces have said that Alberta should step up and we should use the power of our economy to help the rest of Canada. Well, let's just pause for a minute here and confirm what that reveals. Fast forward, imagine we're successful in these referendums and we're now in a negotiation with the rest of Canada, and particularly Ontario and Quebec.
And you can pause it there. Actually, you can leave it there and we'll talk about it just because the clip's messing up a little bit. Something I'm going to say, I've been watching a lot of liberal media and I know I keep hammering on the same thing over and over, and that's the federalization, not just of natural resources, but a lot of sectors within Canada. And now it's finally coming up in the liberal media. I knew it was only a matter of time, but the way they're framing the federalization of natural resources is they're framing it through federalization, saying we need federalization, a Pierre Trudeau type of federalization. We have to modernize. We have to get this. And then the next question on all these liberal minds is, well, how do we do it? So they ask that question and they say, well, every single province is in economic ruin right now. They're already coming to the federal government for help. The federal government should give them help in exchange for federalization. That may be true. That may be true for every other province except for Alberta. It's crucially important now more than ever, especially with the Liberals talking about the federalization of Canada, that Alberta gets out now. Otherwise, they're going to put all kinds of strings on every MOU, every pipeline, everything else. There's a reason no pipeline runs from Alberta directly to the United States. I was looking up today, if other provinces wanted to control Alberta's natural resources, how would they do it? Well, they would have to connect pipelines to other provinces first before going to the United States. And that's exactly what every single pipeline does, including the new Keystone XL pipeline. It goes through Saskatchewan first. And this gives a lot more chips to the federal government on saying what can and can't go through that pipeline.
And yet the U.S. has already approved a few pipelines going directly from Alberta to the U.S. because they know that that would be the most convenient thing, and especially would actually help in supporting Alberta and to help them in supporting and be a leverage point in supporting Alberta independence.
Well, you have to kind of clarify that. Trump, has approved a couple of pipelines if we want to take advantage of that. The problem is Danielle Smith is far more concerned with signing away the economic sovereignty of Alberta to the Canadian federal government and connecting these pipelines to other provinces, which cuts not only the federal government in, but other provinces in as well. She needs to make, or not, I wouldn't even say she needs to make, we need to get somebody in a leadership role within the UCP that will deal directly from a resource base in Alberta and sell that directly to the United States and completely cut out the federal government and say no to carbon taxes because the pipeline doesn't go through any other province.
And also Keith Wilson has been mentioning, especially recently more and more, that it is Alberta's oil, not Canada's oil, because that was already signed away essentially towards Alberta a long time ago.
Yeah, the big problem with this, though, is she keeps connecting all these pipelines to other provinces. And when she does that, it signs the sovereignty of that oil away, as well as the 30 by 30 program, which is a complete land grab from the Federalist side. Again, if the Federalist wants to renegotiate ceded lands as well, that's another big concern. There's a lot of mechanisms quietly mounting up in the background. What Alberta needs now more than ever is independence before these mechanisms start taking actual effect.
And yet the independent side keeps getting hammered while the other Forever Canadian side gets whatever they want, basically. Alberta Proud Dad says, quote, one bus got a parade, the other got police. Forever Canadian was welcomed into Strathmore's parade. Just 17 minutes after Chris Scott arrived with the Let's Talk Alberta bus, police showed up. Chris stood his ground and they left, but is it an equal treatment or two sets of rules? I mean, the examples just go over and over into, obviously, Forever Canada, Canadian, whatever they're called, gets special treatment because they're on the side, the side that they want.
Well, now I understand why people kept bringing up Strathmore on our last Alberta independence episode, and it was because of this situation. This is a major situation. This is absolutely ridiculous. I'm greatly heartened Chris Scott actually stood up to the police here, and I'm glad there was people on site to actually report on this, like Alberta Proud Dad. Now, part 1 and part 2 of his footage were very similar. I decided to just play part 2 because he goes over the overarching situation here.
Ladies and gentlemen, what you have going on here is we're in Strathmore. They're trying to kick us out of the park. They're trying to do whatever they can. It's a peace officer and then I think a representative from the town. And this is the politics that you deal with when you are trying to have a voice.
17 minutes. That's all it took for police to show up. Today in Strathmore, Chris Scott from Let's Talk Alberta brought his bus to town. We were peacefully assembling, doing nothing wrong, and just 17 minutes later, police arrived and tried to intimidate us into leaving. But Chris knew his rights.
Well, I would disagree with you.
Okay.
If you need to pursue it, I can forward you to our legal department.
Okay. He stood his ground. He refused to back down, and eventually the police left. Meanwhile, the Forever Canadian group can assemble without a problem. Their bus was even allowed in the Strathmore parade. One group gets welcomed into a parade. The other gets a visit from police. That is what two-tier policing looks like, and your tax dollars are paying for it. If you need another reason,
Local, provincial, federal and international level, they are just putting up hurdle after hurdle and really having two different kinds of treatment for both sides here. It's absolutely ridiculous. This just points out one example. The example I'm most concerned about is Forever Canada and where all this money is coming from, where these donations are coming from. They're obviously coming from outside of Alberta right now by their own words. They're literally claiming anybody from inside of Canada can donate to the Forever Canada side, and that would be election interference. All donations are supposed to come from inside of Alberta. And every single organization on the Alberta independent side is showing where our money's coming from, dollar for dollar, period. There's amazing transparency, mainly because we know they're already trying to claim foreign interference against us, when I think it's confession through projection, and it's them that has federal and potentially foreign interference.
But we're also seeing, as Alberta Proud was saying there at the end, this should be just another reason for Alberta independence if there's this level of interference and of not allowing one side to have the exact same speech rights or even protest rights as the other one, which is supposed to be, in a democracy that Canada continues to call itself, evident.
Well, and I kind of want to bring up the conversation about federalization that the Liberals are talking about now. And they're saying they have every single province is economically broken and asking the federal government for help. So the federal government needs to exchange federalization for assistance to these provinces on an ongoing basis. That's true for every province except for Alberta. And if every other province agrees to federalization, they're going to really start coming after the one holdout, which is the golden child, Alberta, who can literally stand on its own 2 feet now if the citizens will just take the chance to decide we want freedom, we don't want to go off the economic cliff with the rest of Canada, or support them for the coming decades.
And you can make your voice heard on October 17th, because Let Alberta Decide says, quote, mark your calendars, Alberta Independence Rally on October 17th at 3 p.m. in the Alberta Legislature, just 2 days before the referendum. Pack the grounds with Keith Wilson, Tanya Clemens, and more speakers to be announced. Show the support.
And this is going to be absolutely massive. Both local, national, and international media will be there. This will undoubtedly be the biggest rally. This is exactly what we need 2 days before the vote. One thing I would say, we need to look at Tommy Robinson in the UK. And when he held these massive rallies, he made sure he had security and people with cameras to follow around anybody they looked or thought were plants or suspicious. This is something we're going to want to have at this rally, especially because this rally is going to be massive and it's 2 days before the vote. The mainstream media will want to use any act of violence or anything else against Alberta independence here.
And they love to have those examples and excuses essentially to derail the whole movement. And let's not pretend like we don't remember what happened during the Freedom Convoy. And we already have those examples of both the federal government and also some provincial ones trying to do shenanigans when people were just peacefully protesting to make it seem, especially on mainstream news headlines, like it was the horrible, violent fringe side that was doing all these crazy things, when in reality, now we know it wasn't. It was them, just so they could get a story. But lastly, speaking of Mark Carney, Shadow Intel says, quote, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney says Canadians will be forced to be part of, quote, the next world order, whatever that means, that will emerge from Europe. This will be a unilateral decision that will not ask Canadians for their input. Canada will be part of that effort, using its natural resources, which now they want to federalize, and they're trying to get the public to be aligned with that as well.
Yeah, I watch enough liberal media that they've made the decision in these elbows up liberal minds, supporters of Mark Carney and Mark Carney himself. They want to go to Europe. They think it's an existential threat to cooperate with Donald Trump in any way, shape, or form. They absolutely hate that he's made this deal. That being said, they're excusing it away because they want to align with Europe. Now's the time for both Alberta and Saskatchewan to break free and make that alliance with the United States and re-lean into the identity and the solid foundation that the West was built on.
And as the President mentioned a few weeks ago at the European political community in Yerevan, I was honored to attend, and I said at that meeting that I believe that the next world order will likely be built out of Europe, and Canada will be part of that effort. In security, as the first non-European member to join SAFE, as the President mentioned, under his leadership, Canada is a key member of the coalition of willing to support Ukraine in critical minerals, working with Minister Lutsko as a reliable supplier to our core European partners.
And it's very interesting. He starts bringing up natural resource talk and things like that. Europe is absolutely devastated right now. There's no way for them out of this. They have no source of cheap energy. The one way out of this would be Canada and the federalization of Canada's natural resources and to become part of the European alliance. That when I was game planning out in my head, I said, that's the only way that thing will work. Alberta's chance is now. They're not going to ever have another chance like they do on October 19th. And we need to follow through and make sure by the spring we get that binding referendum. And if we don't, we need to have people in there that are willing to make the hard decision of a unilateral declaration of independence and cite the federal government's reluctance to even follow the law when it comes to a binding referendum. You can go to you for a minute. I have to unplug the other internet. I think that's why the clips are messing up.
Which is also why it's such an existential crisis, and obviously so, both for the federal government and the provincial government, and why we'll continue to see the escalation and the worry that Alberta might leave, because a lot of this plan, a lot of the federalization and the being able to rely on Canada's resources to bring back up the middling powers, or the middle powers as they call it, but it's the middling powers, relies on Alberta and its natural resources being federalized once again, serving more further, because they already serve the interests of the federal government and those of Europe, both of which have essentially destroyed their countries by not wanting to use their own natural resources and actually produce for decades now because of climate change. Okay, let's go back to your comments and then we'll head into the breaking news.
Yeah.
Austin Westwood, hello, says, according to Table Salt, Ottawa has advised mainstream media to prepare for the ending of the Online News Act at the request of Trump. And you were talking about this.
Yeah, Trump is doing all kinds of great things. I mean, the same thing happened with Mexico. In the very beginning, for a very short, brief period of time, Claudia Sheinbaum in Mexico was resisting Trump. But then she looked overall and she said, there's no way, we need to cooperate. But when she started cooperating, man, it ended up bringing a lot of good things into Mexico. And now I'm seeing the same thing happen to Canada. I just wish Carney would wake up a little bit more and start cooperating more. There's going to be a lot of cheap food coming into Canada from the Americans, which is going to give massive relief to Canadians, especially when they go to the grocery store, but also the Online Safety Act. The problem with that is...
News Act, yeah.
And the problem with the Online News Act, the Americans may not be funded anymore, but I'm fully expecting Mark Carney to just step up and take taxpayers' money and start shoving it into mainstream media's pockets.
But you know what I was thinking, and it's also could be an interesting point, actually, coming after the midterms, maybe if they do really want to continue to hit Canada and Carney himself. With Mexico, there was a lot of cooperation because there's a lot of things behind the scenes that the U.S. holds and a lot of cards that they hold in terms of blackmail, etc. Carney has a lot of things in the U.S. and investments and Brookfield and etc. And I'm sure there's a lot of, obviously, internal corruption within the federal government that the U.S. could also exploit for more cooperation.
It's not in the
so it'd be very interesting if that comes out.
It's not in the same way, and I've completely looked into it. They just can't hit him on the same level. Carney's very above board, even though he's doing crooked things. He's doing crooked things inside of the law. This is the one good thing about Mexico being crooked. It gave America a lot of leverage over them. Mm-hmm. But what I will say is that Carney has not renegotiated the USMCA. It's still on a year-to-year renewal or what did you say?
Basis.
On a basis. Yeah, you can continue on.
David W. Collison says the 50% tariff went to 25%, the same 25% as a year ago, so Carney achieved nothing.
Mm-hmm. Well, not even nothing. Again, he's not even in official negotiations. This entire process was never official negotiations. It was pre-talks just to get the 50% threat off. Mexico has been in official negotiations for a long time now, so much so when they entered official negotiations, there was mechanisms agreed to by the Americans and the Mexicans that Mexico wouldn't have to worry about any future threat of tariffs. This is why there was no 50% threat made to Mexico. It was already baked into the negotiations that Mexico's in. And the professor we're going to show in a moment is going to talk about that.
Ellie the Free, hello, says almost like the federal government is playing the same game with Canada's natural resources as they did with Canada's media. Oh, you're having a tough time? How about a bailout? for a price.
Yeah, exactly. And they're going to start trading these bailouts when it comes to natural resources for federalization. And when it comes to private industries, which they're already giving loans out, a lot of these industries aren't going to be able to pay back. They're going to offer second rounds of loans for percentages of these companies. And this is how you get the federalization of Canada very easily. And Liberals are all over online right now. That's all I was watching today, saying we need a Pierre Trudeau style federalization of Canada. We need Pierre Trudeau part 2. This is absolutely ridiculous. He's the one that absolutely destroyed Canada in the first place.
And also, thank you so much to Steve Safaro for the $4.99 super chat,
thank you.
saying Alberta citizens need to somehow reward other Canadians for energy projects. Exactly. And it's not on them. And it's not. And again, it's already been stated and clear that it's Alberta's oil and resources, not Canada's, but they're going to do whatever it takes, I would think, to ensure that they can use them, especially for his new little European project.
They're already bringing people to count the election ballots from outside of Alberta, they're saying, and potentially non-residents. If they rig this in any way, shape, or form, and we're going to be looking at it, it's not going to look good for Alberta. Why? Because they're going to instantly want to start moving towards federalization with other provinces. And they're going to take this vote as, oh, this is a mandate from the people of Alberta that we don't want to separate. So it's very likely if they're going to try to do anything on any election, it's going to be this first election, because Carney has a lot riding on this behind the scenes right now. If Alberta leaves, his house of cards absolutely collapses. It's very crucial that people in Alberta independence apply for these jobs, and that we have poll watchers, and that we're very active on the day of the election.
Yes, but thank you so much, Steve Safaro. And over on RUMBLE, PBE says Carney was picked to bring Canada into the Euro-globalist order. Canadians are so anti-American. All a politician has to do is say America and he wins, or be against America and he wins elections. Exactly. Well, and gets selected prior as well for those elections.
It's going to be very interesting what happens, because he's only going to be able to do that if they can keep Alberta with inside Canada. If Alberta leaves, again, like I just said, his house of cards completely collapses. His keystone to everything he wants actually lies in Alberta, and it's becoming very obvious at this point.
Which is why I would say expect them, the federal government and Forever Canadian, et cetera, to go a lot harder as we get nearer and closer. And especially when, I will say when, on October 19th, people do vote to have that second binding referendum.
Well, you can see on every single level right now, Alberta is the keystone to Canada, whether it's private foreign investment like Meta coming in with the largest private investment in Canadian, maybe not history, but in recent history with $13 billion. You have Trump approving multiple pipelines going to Alberta, also approving the Keystone Pipeline. All that investment is for Alberta. And then you have Mark Carney going into MOUs, talking about future pipelines on as well. Even people that don't like Alberta, like Mark Carney, where is he investing? Alberta, because all the infrastructure and refinement is already built in Alberta. None of the other provinces have the refinement capability because they haven't invested in it.
And now, on that note, let's get into breaking news.
Extra, extra, read all about it. Extra, extra, read all about it.
And let's start with this from Mark Nixon, which is what you were talking about, saying, quote, I can't believe the CBC aired this. CBC Watcher says, lots here. It's a wake-up call. Well, worth a listen.
Okay, and you can leave it there. We're actually going to play the full 11-minute or almost 12-minute clip. We rarely do this. I'm going to pause it periodically throughout, but I watched this morning, and there's multiple times in here I was absolutely shocked. I've been saying a lot of this over and over and over like a broken record. Nobody, even in independent media, is saying a lot of this stuff. I've been saying they need to have a apples to apples comparison on what's happening in Mexico and what's happening with the Canadian negotiations. Now, it takes them a minute to get into it, but I think it's important to play this entire clip. This is some of the best analysis I've seen, and I was just shocked it was on the CBC.
This is Barry Appleton, professor specializing in international negotiations and trade.
Today's meeting between LeBlanc and Greer, Jameson Greer was only going to be about 30 minutes. We're now into hour 3. What do you make of that? Is that good news?
Well, of course it's good news, because at the end of the day, the goal here is to get some certainty, is to try to get some type of agreement. Basically, Canada has paid, we don't know what they paid, but they paid for a 3-day sort of delay on these massive tariffs. So you want to get your money's worth. If we paid for 3 days, I want to get some value for it. Having 3 hours of meeting rather than 45 minutes of meeting has got to be a good thing rather than a bad thing.
Can I ask you to explain that? That's a very interesting way of framing it. Canada has paid for 3 extra days. What do you mean by that?
Well, this is all an extractive exercise, right? The U.S. has been putting leverage on Canada to extract as much as it can. Last summer, they extracted from us too. We had to give up the digital services tax, the DST. We got nothing in return. We were supposed to have talks. We got nothing. This time, we thought, I think, that we were going to get a delay and not have to pay. Clearly, we've had to pay something. We don't know what it is. So at the end of the day, I want to get our money's worth. And then there are two things.
And pause it for a moment here before he keeps going on. And again, we're going to play this whole clip, but again, he's a professor of international negotiations. This is exactly in his wheelhouse. In-depth analysis here. And it's very interesting to say, yeah, they definitely gave up something. We don't know what yet, but we know this is a one-sided deal at this point.
Normally, when you get a delay or you buy anything in the trade world, you get what's called a standstill. The Mexicans have a standstill. That's an agreement from the president of the United States not to impose more tariffs. We don't have that. So we don't have a standstill, and we don't have a thing called a snapback. A snapback is if you don't trust the other side, it automatically punishes them with a penalty. Now, a lot of Canadians don't trust President Trump. So you would think that.
And Mexico doesn't have a snapback either, but they do have a standstill because they've been in official negotiations for quite a while now. And that is one of the things that they baked in. That's why they were impervious to any 50% tariff or threat coming in on their negotiations. Completely opposite than Canada, because Canada never actually entered official negotiations. What they're actually in now are non-official negotiations. And that's why they weren't able to bake these things in.
The first thing that Canada would want is a snapback. So those are the things I'm looking for: standstill and snapback.
Why don't we have a standstill or a snapback?
It's above my pay grade. Ask the minister.
Okay. Then let me ask you this. You had mentioned before you jumped on air that you find it interesting that the Canadian government is not releasing information. Talk to me a bit about that. What's your concern there?
Okay, well, first of all, it's a choice. The Canadian government, though, we are all seeing, we don't know what's going on. We get a tweet from Donald Trump with the Keystone XL pipeline that we knew nothing of being in this negotiation, coming out of the ground, okay? And we see a tweet from the U.S. Trade Representative's Office, USTR, that said that our digital future, there's an alignment on digital trade. So everything from AI to streaming to Canadian content to maybe French language content, all of that has been aligned to American standards. Where the hell did that come from? We know nothing. Now, let's look by comparison to the Mexicans. Because the Mexicans have had 3 full negotiations. In each negotiation, we know when it's going to be. It's scheduled. In each negotiation, each day has an agenda, a topic. The topic today is going to be lumber. The topic today is going to be autos. And each day we get a readout, what they agreed upon. So we don't have to live on tweets with Mexico. We get an official statement. Right now, Canadians don't know, so we're worried. We're anxious. You see.
And you're getting full readouts from the Mexican government, what's discussed each day, as well as a standstill. So there will be no threat of a tariff. Mexico has handled this extremely professionally right from the beginning. And they were asking the Canadians to come to the table to give them more negotiating power. And Canada was not showing up. Mexico was the one that outed Canada on that eventually because they weren't showing up. And then the Americans confirmed it. And then finally, the Canadians had to come out and admit what was really going on there. But the fact that there's a readout and the Mexican public can know exactly what's going on in those negotiations is absolutely crucial. The Canadians need to start reading those readouts so they can see how a negotiation is actually supposed to happen. Not the Mark Carney way, but the way if you actually want to get a deal. The problem I think we have here with Mark Carney is he's so used to negotiating from a position of power. He does not know how to negotiate when he does not have leverage. Therefore, he chose not to negotiate. And he only came to the table when Donald Trump gave a 50% threat of a tariff, and then he only negotiated on that part. He actually didn't negotiate on the entire USMCA because he doesn't know how to negotiate from a power of disadvantage.
But he's a master negotiator.
This everywhere. And we swing either too optimistic or too pessimistic because we have imperfect information. That was a choice by the Canadian government. I think it's a poor choice. I think the better choice is to level with Canadians and let them know, because that worked for the Mexicans. I think they're doing better than negotiations than we are. But right now,
and one of the reasons you have to figure Canada did not have transparency like the Mexicans did, they did not enter into official negotiations, they did not have daily readouts, is because they wanted to lie to the Canadian public. They were constantly saying, we are in negotiations. It's Donald Trump that is derailing these things. And the truth of the matter is, Canada was not even coming to the table when it was supposed to be Canada, America, and Mexico renegotiating the entire deal.
And funnily enough, it was Mexico that did come out and say, hey, Canada's not showing up and we don't know kind of what to do because they're supposed to be in here with us. And also, it's almost oxymoronic that it's the Mexican government that is giving all of these readouts and all this information to the people, because this particular government is one of the most non-transparent, muddy governments that we've had. So it's kind of insane that now, compared to the Canadian government, they're so transparent.
Well, I'll say one other thing.
That should say something too.
I do not like the Mexican government in a lot of way, shape, or forms. They are far left ideologues, much like Mark Carney. The difference is this happens to be the one thing she has done an excellent job on. Everything else, extremely woke policies within Mexico. But when it came to these negotiations, this is the one thing she really took a conservative, I would say, outlook perspective and entered into negotiations with.
Because she kind of has to, but...
His meeting.
Oh, no. Kind of moved.
You know, and right now, it doesn't look like there have been really serious discussions on softwood. Yeah. Softwood's not a new area. It's been a dispute for 44 years. What do you tell to the Premier of British Columbia? Because they don't have autos. They don't have steel. But they want to know what our progress is on softwood if they're going to give up the booze ban. And that's the question. See, right now, the provinces are really controlling whether or not we can do this deal. And they've said they won't make a deal unless they get substantial progress on the things that are important to them. BC said it's got to be softwood, and I haven't seen it. Maybe it's there. Canadians don't know. They have a right to know. We all need to know so we can assess, was it worth paying the price or not?
Well, again,
and pause it right there. And that was very interesting what he said there. The provinces have a lot of leverage here to decide if whatever Mark Carney tries to negotiate, if that actually goes forward. And when there's so much talk on liberal media right now about the federalization of Canada and keeping provinces poor, there could be an ultimate strategy here of one province derailing the entire negotiation, absolutely collapsing individual provinces' economies, and then them having to go to the federal government, at least in the eyes of the public, to beg for handouts and in exchange for federalization. So if this negotiation does get derailed, I would expect mass federalization in a very quick order.
There won't be any discussion about softwood until tomorrow, but seemingly the deal is going to be agreed upon. So if softwood isn't getting discussed until tomorrow, where does that leave us? Now, you brought up this thing, which we heard from Manitoba's Premier Wab Kinew a while ago, or a couple of hours ago, where he came out swinging. He said that we should continue to fight, even if we put American booze back on the shelves, which he's clearly against. Don't buy that stuff. He says this is an untrustworthy partner. You can't rely on Donald Trump. We should fight back. He says we have the leverage. Trump is weak, and we should be pushing, because once we give all this away, the procurement away, the negotiations away, we give away the booze, give away on softwood lumber, what is our leverage at that point? What do you make of that type of argument?
I think you need to think about choke points, like the Strait of Hormuz. That's a choke point. And it wasn't really important until the Americans made it important, and then it became vitally important.
And I will say again, if one premier like a Doug Ford behind closed doors decides with Mark Carney to derail this trade negotiation, there will be no deal. It will be an economic collapse. And then provinces, their only option will be federalization. This could be a plan. It's kind of something I'm looking for, especially if a Doug Ford steps up and says no deal.
They told us, with exceptions, what was important to them. They exempted potash. They exempted energy. They identified for us the types of things that were the true leverage points where we could really go. And what they want very, very much is, foundationally, to put the booze back on the shelves. So I understand why a province would be unwilling, because the provinces control that. So at the end of the day, the Prime Minister has a very tough job. He has to get the Americans on side, but he's also got to get the premiers on side. The premiers say, we're not going to do it unless you show us. And one of our problems is we don't have a Council of the Federation on Trade, where the premiers...
And one more thing here. If one of the premiers does derail it, Mark Carney can literally say, well, I had a deal. It was Doug Ford, so he looks like the good guy at that point. And then again, he can look like the good guy when he brings federalization through bailouts.
Prime Minister sit together to figure this out. The premiers got the briefing after the cabinet. The premiers should be there if they're going to be giving up stuff. That's our problem. Our problem is structure. So much of this is our own problems. It's sort of like in FIFA in the World Cup, if we're scoring on our own net. Canada's got to deliver here. I want these negotiations to go as well as they can, but we can structure our team, we can structure our resources so much better, so much more effectively. Less stress, less wear and tear on average Canadians, more certainty makes for a better outcome, not a worse outcome. So that's sort of my problem
And
today.
he's talking about structure there, and the structure that needed to happen was official negotiations and to build in the mechanism that Mexico built in, which is called a standstill. So it avoids any threat of future tariffs as long as they're in current negotiations. Canada decided not to go to the negotiation table. They're not even in official negotiations. When the original talks came up of avoiding the 50% tariff, one of the things Canada wanted now, finally, was the Americans to make an announcement that official negotiations have begun. I haven't heard a word about that in over a week now.
And the premiers are a really good example because they don't know what's going on and they need to be there if we want to get this done.
What do we do in the interim if, let's say, the deal gets signed midnight Saturday morning, and then there's still a CUSMA negotiation? So what I've been trying to figure out for the last 2-3 days is, if this deal goes ahead, is this the baseline for CUSMA? Or it's just a holdover until we get to CUSMA? Or is CUSMA out the window and this is now it? Like, what's your take on that?
This is a really good question. So, first of all, CUSMA, as we know it, according to Premier Mo today, is dead. Okay, so CUSMA is there. It's a foundational agreement. It could be terminated on 6 months' notice. Donald Trump doesn't have to give us a reason. Obviously, we want the CUSMA to continue. So what we're going to see is some type of an agreement on reciprocal trade. We call them ARTs. They're the new thing in Washington. There are 21 of them. They are these
And again, if CUSMA is dead, or at any point America pulls the rug out from under Canada because they haven't even entered into bilateral talks for a new trade deal, Canada is in real trouble there.
And there are 21 of them. They are these deals that the U.S. administration cooks up. Here, the deal is going to be, what do we trade to not have this vicious 338 tariff? Remember, it had never been used before. It's within total presidential authority. And the president doesn't have to go to Congress. So our midterm strategy, the way them out and get the Congress on side, makes no point. It was designed to extract leverage from us. And to be honest, it worked. So now the question is, what do you pay? If you have to pay something, I want the best deal possible. I want to pay the least I possibly can. What is the best way to get some protection? So right now, we have a temporary deal. I'll call this sort of like paying for parking. And before a big event happens, they charge you more. Before the concert, before the FIFA game, the price of parking goes up 3 times. It's surge pricing. Okay, so President Trump is doing surge pricing on Canada. And right now, what we're paying for is the opportunity to try to negotiate to get a tariff, the big ones. Canada says, well, if you're going to deal with a big tariff, we want to deal with the sectorals, steel, aluminum.
Okay, and you can leave it there. It was just about over. But something I would say here is, Mark Carney is going to give up a lot here, but if he can enter into official negotiations with the United States for a bilateral talk, and get a standstill added in there like the Mexicans did, so no future threat of tariffs can come, I think that would be an overall victory. I just don't think that is going to be in there. That's the one thing I'm going to be looking for more than anything else. If they don't enter into official talks and negotiate a standstill in there like the Mexican has, that's going to be a big problem for the Canadians.
But also with Mexico, what's kind of funny is that it is the clear example and the clear mirror to what Canada has and hasn't been doing. So it's not like Canada can continue, and Carney and the negotiations can continue to try to say, oh no, we're not doing this, oh no, that's not true, they're lying, because there's a clear example that it can be done and that it can actually benefit the country negotiating with the US as well.
Well, and you have a day-by-day breakout of exactly what the Mexicans have done to enter into official negotiations to get a standstill put into the trade talks, go into round 1 of trade talks, round 2, round 3. Now they're on round 4. Day by day, what was talked about each day. This is the exact same trade deal Mexico and Canada has, and their economies are very similar in a lot of ways, at least how they interact with the United States.
And yet we do continue to see Carney trying to give himself that title of being a great or a master negotiator. Here from Wealth Move says, quote, Carney saying, I'm a good negotiator. I know how to manage a crisis. Yeah, right. Let's look at steel and aluminum. In March 2025, the U.S. tariffs were at 25%. Canada retaliated. So in June 2025, the U.S. tariffs rose to 50%, but Canada did not match the increase. So now tariffs are now back to 25.
And again, none of this makes sense when you compare Canada's strategy directly apples to apples against the Mexicans now. And the liberal media does not want to talk about that whatsoever. That's why I was so shocked when that last clip came up and they went in detail.
Good, because I'm a good negotiator. I have negotiated a number of situations in the past. I know how to manage crises.
25% reciprocal tariffs on an additional 29.
And he says, I'm a master negotiator. I'm a good negotiator. I negotiated crises. And the thing is, he causes a lot of those crises. So he has the upper hand within the negotiations. But in this case, he is negotiating from a position where he has no leverage. And I don't think he's been in this position before. And that's why I think he's failing so spectacularly. Mexico, on the other hand, has had to negotiate it from a deleveraged position many times in their history. So I think they're more used to negotiating from a place of non-power.
$0.8 billion of imports from the United States.
Canada is reeling from a new round of U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum. President Trump hiked tariffs to 50% last night. As America's largest supplier of both steel and aluminum, it is a major blow to Canadian exports.
Much later.
Yes, sectoral tariffs will go down, but they did not know by how much, or they couldn't say with certainty. Bloomberg, for example, is reporting they're going to be cut in half from 50 to 25%.
I am Mark Carney. I'm the best of them all. I'm a great negotiator. I have managed crisis in the past. I would change the world, trust me. And it appears that it never happened.
We're in a stronger position today than when the trade war began.
And absolute BS from Mark Carney at the very end there. That was very true. The guy that went on just before Mark Carney from Quebec.
Yeah, but also, hold on.
And again, a lot of those crises, it almost seems like a lot of those crises were intentionally caused to give Mark Carney the upper hand in a lot of those different negotiations.
And the lack of transparency too. But CBC Watcher says, quote, the ongoing CBC parade of Liberal deal apologists continues because we can't tell the actual information and the actual worrying information to the Canadian public. Dwight Duncan, the former Liberal Ontario Finance Minister who helped turn the province into a debt-addled manufacturing hollowing out cautionary tale, was on the CBC earlier, cheerleading, of course, Mark Carney's stick-handling surrender. Because that's what it was. It's a surrender for now.
Provinces, based on the various analysis I've heard. But we first and foremost need a national response. We don't need other things to get in the way of this. We're dealing again with a major, unstable, unreliable trading partner.
That's Canada. Canada is the unstable and now unreliable trading partner for not just the US, but also Mexico, because clearly Mexico has come out to say they're not even there. That's unreliable.
And it's not going to be a good day on Friday.
And that is, of course, important perspective to keep in mind. It's interesting that you use the language elbows up. Certainly, we know this was a prime minister who was essentially elected on a very strong elbows up platform. And you're suggesting that that has switched from...
There's a storm today. Apologies.
And
that has...
Provinces.
And let it play... No, I need... okay.
To go back to where it was?
No.
There. Sorry, hold on. Because now X resets the videos by itself.
Canadians were not thinking that they were going to come out of this with the raw end of the deal.
You missed some of it.
Prime Minister was very clear.
I mean, how should the Canadian public interpret that or react to that? Because certainly Canadians were not thinking that they were going to come out of this with the raw end.
Yes.
No, that's where we were.
No.
Okay.
And that is, of course, important perspective to keep in mind. It's interesting that you use the language elbows up. Certainly, we know this was a prime minister who was essentially elected on a very strong elbows up platform. And you're suggesting that that has switched from elbows up to stick handling. I mean, how should the Canadian public interpret that or react to that? Because certainly Canadians were not thinking that they were going to come out of this with the raw end of the deal.
Prime Minister was very clear from the get-go. And you know, when Liberation Day happened, we took a cheap hit in the corner. So you get your elbows up. But then you start to move on the longer term challenges that we're faced with. And now it becomes more a game of stick handling. And that's what this is all about.
And pause it for a second. That term of stick handling is all over. They are pushing out talking points today about we need a national response. They're talking about federalization now. They're talking about under Pierre Trudeau, Canada was under threat as well. That's why we had to go through federalization. We need a second federalization within Canada, not only to have provinces work together, but they mentioned many other things. Now, one of the things they're not mentioning is the nationalization of natural resources, but that's definitely within that context.
Yes, but hold on, because thank you so much to Steve Safaro for the $9.99, sorry, for the $9.99 super chat saying,
you.
I was there at 9/11. I saw people fall to the ground. Does the world need another mass casualty event to recognize good versus evil? While we're all squabbling about trades, do we know what awaits us? Some people do, some people don't want to see it, and some people want to cheer it on and fight for it. Apparently also within the retarded right, I would say.
Well, the Western Hemisphere would be the strongest pull around the world, or the strongest region, as long as Canada gets on board. Canada and Brazil are the two big holdouts, but even if Brazil continues to hold out, the Western Hemisphere can be extremely strong. Canada is actually one of the crucial pieces needed, and if they continue to hold out and they want to align with Europe, the Western Hemisphere isn't going to be nearly as strong as it could have been, because that's where a lot of natural resources lie.
And that's why the squabbling actually does reflect and does impact the very same question, the good versus evil, because we don't want the evil that would be turning towards that new middling powers, new world, or whatever you called it. So, but thank you so much. Now back to where we were.
To win on Friday. The U.S. is not going to win on Friday with this deal. What we don't need to have happening is every provincial or mayor, whatever, obviously they have to defend their community's interest. I've sat across the table from the Americans when we bailed out Chrysler and General Motors. And we need to handle this very carefully. And I believe the Prime Minister has brought the exact level of carefulness to this approach. Friday is not a good day. Friday is going to be agreeing to tariffs on certain industries, giving concessions, and nobody suggested for a minute there'd be no concessions. And I would ask those who somehow suspect we shouldn't concede on anything, what happens then? And then we get 50%.
And pause it. And they wouldn't have had to concede on a single thing if you would have already went into official negotiations and had a stop baked into those negotiations, which the Mexicans had. They already showed the roadmap to do it. The Canadians decided to go the opposite route. Basically, they decided to try to wait Trump out. The problem is Trump noticed, went after him with the threat of 50% tariffs, and now it's forcing the Canadians into what they want to be in, is negotiations. Can they even get into official negotiations at this point? I'm really doubting that they can.
This is a no-win situation. We have to manage our way out of it carefully.
Now, what do you say, Mr. Duncan, to those who ask the question, okay, so if we concede without getting enough relief on this case, where does it end? Do we end up just continuing down a path of concessions when we do have a very strong negotiator next to us who, of course, has pushed us into stick handling, as you've suggested?
And again, that's the path you're on now because you chose not to go into negotiations. I was very shocked when that professor talked about that stop that Mexico had baked in. I didn't know a lot of that. And if Canada gets that baked in, it prevents the Americans from continuously putting on onerous tariffs. There's already a solution here. All you have to do is go into official negotiations and get a stop baked into that, period. They should have been into official negotiations well over a year ago. Okay, we can leave it there.
Exactly. And lastly, sorry, hold on. Let's go to this from CBC Watcher saying, quote, Vance also added that Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is, quote, a non-entity in the talks, as he has continuously been for, I would say, almost since he got in.
Well, it might sound like a little bit of a slight to call him a non-entity, but I actually think it's a good thing because it shows he hasn't done anything good or bad in those negotiations. Everything should land on Mark Carney's shoulders, which I think they eventually will here.
The U.S. Vice President, has weighed in on the trade talks between his country and Canada. In audio from a fundraiser obtained by the Canadian press, J.D. Vance said that Mark Carney tried to out-tough Donald Trump in the negotiations, but had to climb down on a lot of issues. Vance also added that Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is a, quote, non-entity in the talks. He also then went on to praise Conservative MP Jamil Javani for his advocacy. The U.S. president.
It's also interesting there that they kind of cut up a quote because it looked like there was a lot more that JD said, but they didn't show it.
Something I'll kind of say here is there needs to be an ideological change. Canada had preferred status amongst the globalists and amongst this progressive liberal mindset, which had ruled the United States for decades. Even though there was a two-party system, overall, it was a progressive liberal mindset. And now what we see is a shift and a change happening in the United States. Countries like Argentina and other countries that are much more conservative are getting preferred status. If Canada had a leader that was ideologically in line with the United States, I don't think you would have these same troubles.
Exactly. But I mean, even Poilievre went on the defense of Canada. So right now there isn't one. The only one, potential one, could be a Danielle Smith if they can oust Pierre, and then she ends up ousting someone like a Doug Ford or a Jason Kenney.
Well, Poilievre doesn't garner the respect from the American administration like another conservative possibly could in Canada.
Because he decided to go full hard on against the U.S.
Well, although I know Canadians overall like Pierre Poilievre. Now, he's not my favorite because he's against Alberta overall, but you can understand why he is. That being said, if he was leading Canada, it would be fine. But because he's going to be thrown into a position where he has to have direct contact with the Americans on a daily basis, and it's already a point of discontent for them, a Danielle Smith or somebody else might work better in that position. Danielle Smith, again, isn't somebody that I like, but I think she would work good in that position because she's shown a willingness to negotiate with all sides, as well as go down to the United States and talk with Trump.
And she might actually be eyeing that position up in Ottawa. But let's go back to your comments. Mike Freedom Honey, hello, and thank you for being here. So smash the like button. Thank you so much. Yes, it does help. So smash the like button now if you haven't done it yet. Ellie the Free says, yep, letting people actually see how Canada's government negotiates would destroy their image of being competent and effective, and they're just neither of those things. That, but also the fact that a lot of the middling powers in Europe and etc. have been praising and kneeling down on Mark Carney after his Davos speech, and after he's been saying that he's going to be the leader of the middling powers and he's going to get us out of this situation, and that he's going to stand up to the entity that is Trump.
Well, he has a multi-billion-dollar media machine where you're never going to really get an honest opinion of what's happening in the Canadian negotiations. They're always going to spin it in his best benefit. But even independent media right now really needs to focus on what's going to expose Carney, and that is the Mexicans, the Mexican negotiations, the daily readout, the way they've had a stop baked into their official negotiations. These are the points that need to be brought up that will absolutely cook Carney and the tactics used in the Canadian negotiations against the Americans. There's a direct apples to apples comparison, and it doesn't look good when you compare them side by side. The big benefit Mark Carney has had is the mainstream media never brings this up, except for the one clip that I was able to find there.
And Sean says, hey guys, hello. Thank you for being here, Sean. Don Natalie says, hi, Nat and Guy. And thank goodness it's Friday. Yes. Holden says, Mark Carney, Karl Marx, never wanted a deal. He is here to purchase positive coverage while he lines his pockets in the pockets of his WEF globalist friends.
Yeah, again, it's a bit of a conspiracy theory I'm pitching here, but I am not going to be shocked if Mark Carney gets some kind of deal, and behind the scenes, he had already talked to Doug Ford or another premier to hold out to crash that deal. Mm-hmm. So it will put the provinces in a tailspin economically and then force federalization on all of Canada. And it will make Mark Carney look like the good guy because he's the one that got the deal, number one, and he's the one giving the bailouts in exchange for federalization. It's definitely a game plan that would work if you're looking towards federalization. I just don't know if they're going to do it. But if there is one premier or a couple of premiers that hold out, I think that is definitely an orchestrated move.
Mm-hmm. Up to his moose, hello, says, hurt feelings, bozo, uncomfortable truths got you hot and bothered, snitch on them and send your neighbors to prison. About that guy that was giving that interview just now. Tall Talk says, howdy again, Nat and Guy, hello, and thank you for being here. Holden says, Carl or Carney will have a win next July 1st, 2025. 27, I guess. Yep. Yeah. And Canadian Spider-Man says, good afternoon, good afternoon. And Option Trader says, I come in peace. Thank you for being here.
Oh, good to see you again.
And over in RUMBLE, PPE says, hold on. Carney shorted the Canadian dollar for a year. He set up Brookfield and himself to make money as Canada's economy collapses.
Yeah, the problem, there's multiple problems in Canada, but one of the things a weak dollar usually brings, it brings manufacturing into the country. The problem is the overregulation of Canada is causing a weak dollar, and it's keeping manufacturers out and investors out.
And also PBE says, what's so funny to me is the more Canadian media and politicians and talking heads attack Trump and America, they prove how dependent Canada is on the US.
Absolutely.
Exactly. And I mean, for those that still want to continue with the farce that it isn't, well, they're going to continue to hurt actual Canadian and Canadian citizens. On that note, let's get into Alberta politics.
He doesn't discuss federal politics. He only concerns himself with Alberta's independence.
And let's start with this from Stephen Taylor saying, quote, Alberta NDP leader Naheed Nenshi joins a parade. You could hear a pin drop. What is he wearing?
Man, we needed something to lighten up the mood, I guess. There was a lot of serious news going into those last clips. Absolutely ridiculous. I mean...
And he posted it as himself,
yeah,
which is even more embarrassing.
Oh God! And of course, I got my Halloween costume on with my cowboy. I never wear unless I have it at a parade or somewhere I need it.
It's a great day for a parade. Great to see you all. Great day to be Canadian.
What is that body shape?
Nice to see you. Good morning.
Vote to stay in Canada. Vote to make Nenshi your leader. Like, my God.
That is the Canada you'd be choosing to stay in if you want to stay in Canada.
He's a walking advertisement for Alberta independence. It's actually a really great thing that he is placed within Alberta.
Yeah. But next, Ms. Catherine Gladys says, quote, in the city of Calgary, men are allowed to enter the women's locker rooms and washrooms as a citywide policy. We might want to be careful here because if we weren't in Mexico, if we were in Canada, we could actually get a phone call or a visit from the police if we talk about this.
And we can go into it. She explains it pretty good. But one of the big reasons I brought this up is Danielle Smith keeps making these headlines like this isn't happening in Alberta. Pride flags aren't in the classrooms, but they're still hanging in a lot of classrooms. Yes, they've been taken out of a few. This is still going on. There are all kinds of things going on. Report your neighbor or rat out your neighbor are plastered on buses. There's a hotline for it. All these things she said wouldn't happen are happening. She's not actually fighting for sovereignty. She's currently giving sovereignty away, whether it's economically through the MOUs or otherwise. People are starting to see through Danielle Smith in Alberta now. Now, the rest of Canada isn't. The rest of Canada sees Danielle Smith as the best thing since sliced bread. The best thing for her now is to step down and make her way to Ottawa because she still does have a good reputation amongst national conservatives.
That's what I was going to say. I think she knows that by now and is probably planning her next moves.
Howdy, everyone. I'm in Calgary, Alberta, and I am currently at the Killarney Aquatic and Recreation Centre run by the City of Calgary. Now, come with me. I want to show you something interesting, and then I'd love to get your comments on what you think about this situation. Currently in Calgary, according to the guy who works here, there is no such thing as a women's locker room.
And a lot of problems with the clips today. I will say
it might be X, actually.
And they do have all these stickers up, and hopefully we'll be able to get to it saying it's a safe space with a rainbow flag, this and that. This is the problem when you get specialty groups and classes. And in a free and independent Alberta, everybody will be treated the same under the eyes of the law. You're not going to have specialty groups and classes and then be able to stack hate speech laws on top of that so you can prosecute certain people but not other people for saying the same thing or having the same behavior. This is one of the big reasons Alberta needs its independence.
Room or change room.
Oh no.
And you can leave it there.
Let me just go to
the citywide policy. Here we have the sticker endorsed by the City of Calgary.
And this is going on all across Canada right now. And this is the problem with specialty groups and classes. And we talk about this quite a bit.
And with actually thinking that it's a good decision and, again, obfuscating when asked if these policies that are supposed to not be in place anymore, why they are still there. And it shouldn't be controversial. It shouldn't have to be a thing to say women deserve their own spaces, especially after there's multiple evidence at this point that as to why they're important.
Well, the reason they're there is because Danielle Smith got the headline. Everybody thinks she's fixed these problems, and Alberta doesn't have the problems of the rest of Canada, but she gets the headline and there's no follow through. And the reason there's no follow through is she wants to jumble together different voting blocks.
And yet something did happen, might have happened. CBC Watcher says, quote, the scrapped EV mandate, saying, quote, the Alberta government said it was unrealistic and affordable and would have taken choices away from consumers. The mandate was scrapped this week without new stricter tailgate emission standards the Fed said it would replace. Ford and other premiers now want the EV mandate scrapped too, but why is this CTV? And we know why. Trying to pin it all on Alberta because right now Alberta is a hot topic. They want to shackle to Canada.
Other news we're watching, Alberta's premier is taking credit for the federal government's move to repeal its electric vehicle sales mandate. CTV's Amanda Anderson explains what it can mean for consumers and Alberta's voice in the country.
As part of a push to reduce emissions, the Trudeau government introduced an electric vehicle sales mandate, a plan that would have seen EVs account for 20% of vehicle sales this year and 100% by 2035.
When it was announced, we would say that it was good to have an ambitious target, but was it realistic? Maybe, maybe not. Time will tell, and maybe time's telling us, right?
Several provinces fought it. The Alberta government said it was unrealistic, unaffordable, and would have taken choices away from consumers.
I drive a Hemi. It's for a reason. I like the noise. I like the rumble. Me sitting down in something you can't feel it go. No.
You have to replace your batteries after 10 years. It's a significant cost. And so that's kind of the part of my problem with it. But as far as
you can leave it there, and they don't work in cold weather very well either. But this is a policy I would expect to be rolled out across Canada, but they want to give the spotlights to Alberta because they're trying to place Danielle Smith in a good place to go against the independence movement right now. And that's an issue. I think their overall plan was to flood Canada with Chinese EVs, and that's quickly falling apart because of Trump. I think Trump has a lot more to do with this than Danielle Smith, Mark Carney, or any other premier in Canada. The same reason we have a pipeline, the Keystone XL pipeline, is because of Trump as well. The reason free speech might come back, at least a little bit in Canada, is because of Trump too, because he's going after a lot of the free speech acts they're trying to implement.
Yes.
The News Act.
Yes. But now let's go back to your comments and then we'll head into Alberta Personalities. Obtuse Moose says, Americans thought you were our friend. We thought you were our friends, but we still love Alberta. And that's the thing. Canada also doesn't want to admit that they basically fully rely on the US. And yet for the past few decades, one of the main defining things that Canada and Canadians have been teaching themselves is that they're better than the US. Well, increasingly, it becomes less and less true, if it ever was. Option Trader says Canadian media is worse with the TDS than our US media. Just wow. Again, because it's that defining characteristic of what makes someone and something Canadian now, to hate on the US because of jealousy. Says, you guys attack us, the president and the rhetoric. It's just very aggressive. Wow. On purpose as well, because it helps maintain a mechanism of control over a lot of the population, even though now the figures have come out, the recent ones from 2025, saying that about more than 120,000 people did leave during all of 2025, which is the highest number it's ever been.
Well, it's actually more than double that. The number you're quoting is of people that officially left, actually announced to the government, I'm leaving. Hundreds of thousands of people leave Canada every year and never announce it. They just leave.
And most of them are leaving for the US, and yet. Canadian Spider-Man says, if we had true justice, David Cochrane, Rosemary, and all the mainstream media would be on trial for high treason, and I'm not kidding in any way. And I don't take it as kidding because exactly right, they should be for actually misinforming the public and for propagandistic media. But thank you so much, Steve Safaro, for the $4.99 super chat, saying do not let anyone push EV upgrades. Sad reality, but each new battery tech is less costly than any refit. But EA new battery tech is less costly than any refit.
Yeah, and ask yourself one question. If Trump didn't get in office the last time, would any of this stuff be happening? Would they be taking down EVs? Would we be getting pipelines? Absolutely not. And if we don't get a J.D. Vance or somebody else in the White House after Trump, then they're going to go back to their strategy, which was to wait Trump out and then go at twice the speed to make up for lost time. It's crucially important after Trump that we get a J.D. Vance or a populist president within the White House, not just for Alberta's sake, but for the world's sake at this point, because the globalists are in full-on retreat right now. We also need a president within the White House that will recognize Alberta as an independent nation in case we do need to declare a unilateral declaration of independence.
True. And Option Trader says, I didn't know 2 people make a parade. Well, then she's big enough. I guess it counts for more than 1. Canadian Spider-Man says, it hasn't been a great day to be a Canadian in 15 years at least. And what's saddest is the young people. The young people, a lot of them didn't get to know the actual Canada that a lot of the boomers and a lot of the even Gen Xers are reminiscent about it and have rose-tinted colored glasses on for. They didn't get that. They just got the disaster that's been handed down both from Trudeau, the Liberals, but also now Carney, accelerating the insanity and the decline.
Yeah.
That's all they get.
Well, yeah, we can leave it there.
Norma, hello Norma, says, bye-bye, Danny. She can go to Ottawa. Canadian Spider-Man says, China. Yes. And Obtuse Moose says, LMAO, they added a feather to it now. Feather to what? Okay. Obtuse Moose says, how about just a white flag with an X on it? Oh, the Canadian flag, yes. Canadian Spider-Man says, most women actually voted for this, so I'm tempted to let them suffer the consequences of their actions. Otherwise, they'll never learn.
Yeah, the big problem is going to be we need independence now because we know the strategy and the mechanisms that have been built by Mark Carney for 2027, 2028, and beyond. Mass immigration floodgates are about to be opened. And when they do open them, they're going to want to flood Alberta so they never have a chance for independence again. Now is the time. There's a unique moment in history that we have to break free, get our freedom without having to fight a civil war here. We simply go to the ballot box and vote for freedom.
But you know what's sad also? Yes, a lot of women voted for this and they tend to vote usually more liberal and for Trudeau because he was handsome, but he's not. But also a lot of men in Canada are also on the same boat. And I feel like there's been a shortage of testosterone up in Canada.
Well, there's a PSYOP to demasculinize men on a global basis. But a lot of these PSYOPs that are happening on a global basis are working extremely well in Canada, where whether it's population replacement to get new voter blocks in there, or whether it's the PSYOP to demasculinize men through the mainstream media.
Yes, and Sean B says, Jabba the Hutt in a Canada shirt, Jabba the Canadian man. Okay, now let's get into Alberta personalities, and then I'll continue reading your lovely comments.
But they need to understand that Albertans are done, we're leaving, and there's no more conversation to be had. I know that's upsetting to people.
And let's start with this from CBC Watcher saying, quote, Ivy Lewis on Hearts the XL pipeline deal. We're hearing, I'm losing my voice. We're hearing from the NDP leader, Avi Lewis, that he doesn't want this project to go ahead. Let's watch.
We are hearing from the NDP leader, Avi Lewis, that he doesn't want this project to go ahead. He issued a statement in reaction to these trade negotiations, urging the federal government to not move forward with this pipeline. And he's also urging the federal government not to make any further concessions to the U.S. without getting anything in return. He notes that no deal is better than a
And pause it for a moment. And this is the most believable strategy if they want to sabotage this deal intentionally to federalize Canada. This would benefit Mark Carney, make him look like the good guy. Oh, I got a deal. It would also get a lot of voters over to the NDP, a lot of these climate zealots, a lot of people that want to keep their elbows up and think Mark Carney's elbows aren't high enough. If somebody does resist it, Avi Lewis may be telling one of the NDP premiers within one of the provinces, maybe David Eby, maybe somebody else. Wab Kinew is also part of the NDP.
Bad deal.
That was it. That was a clip. But I mean, and of course, Avi Lewis doesn't think this is a good deal. But just like I think they're using Daniel Smith for their own purposes, they're probably going to use Avi Lewis for their own purposes as well, because it's all.
Avi Lewis doesn't have as much power though, because he's not a premier there. But what he could tell one of the premiers to take a certain action on the behalf of the NDP so they can slice off a lot of the voter block from the Liberals. And now's a great opportunity for the NDP to get those voters that have been indoctrinated into climate change and everything else. Or he wants to get a lot of the elbows up bozos that don't like this deal.
And the First Nations too. I mean, they've already been using them for private property rights in BC, but tells us that they won't continue to use them against pipelines, for example. But also on the other side now, Ellie Continental says conservative Civil War lobbyist and Doug Ford advisor Corey Teniak slams Pierre Poilievre as an a-hole and calls him Skippy. Teniak also reiterated that Poilievre is a conservative Justin Trudeau and suggested that some conservative MPs may have brain injuries.
Yeah, and this is Corey tonight. This is the campaign manager for Doug Ford. This is the guy behind the scenes that is the power broker for the traditional Conservative Party in Canada. I just kind of wanted to profile him a little bit, show what he's kind of saying. He is the one trying to organize behind the scenes the ousting of Pierre Poilievre.
You know, is sort of a semi-professional asshole. But, you know, the only people who aren't very concerned about losing their seat in that caucus right now probably have some form of brain injury. But in fairness,
I can guess which ones.
Yeah, well, there's always a few, right? Yeah, look, it's grim. It's grim, and it relates to some of the things that we were talking about earlier. It's really a leadership question, and when you look at best prime minister, you know, 18% of people think that Poilievre would be the best prime minister, and it's like, I don't know, 56, 58, whatever it is for Carney. This is the crux of the problem, is a huge differential in the popularity of these two leaders. I think a lot of that is based on, you know, we're in serious times, and Poilievre isn't a serious person. Poilievre is conservative Justin Trudeau. And he is.
And pause it for a moment. And this sounds like liberal propaganda. He's supposed to be a conservative, but you're seeing these talking points. You've been seeing him leak out for months now. He hasn't had a successful campaign to get rid of Poilievre because Poilievre is popular with the independent media within Canada, which is giving a lot of resistance to his plans behind the scenes. Normally, it would be easy for him to conduct an ousting, but the independent media, or at least the conservative independent media, is really putting up a fight here, and it's stopping his plans there.
Justin Trudeau, he's sort of never had a real job, you know, probably unemployable outside of politics. You know, there's like a lot of, you know, but very good at the soundbite and, you know, is sort of a semi-professional asshole. But
what would it take to go full pro?
I think he's at least a full-time
He's trying. Look.
He may not be professional, but he's highly successful.
He's practiced.
Certainly
okay, and you can leave it there. And I will say, man, he has been on liberal panel after liberal panel after liberal panel.
But PP or Poilievre isn't even an a-hole, I would say. He's just useless. He's a what?
Yeah, but you're not going to get anybody else as a national leader of Canada, maybe a Danielle Smith. Yeah. They're not going to put somebody in there as controlled opposition that they have not vetted at this point. And I think Alberta Independence and Danielle Smith is that vetting process they're putting her through right now in case they do need to replace Pierre Poilievre. They don't want to put a Doug Ford or Jason Kenney in there because it's just going to look too obvious, like there is no opposition and Conservatives have no voice, and people will get really disgruntled at that point. Even the Liberals want somebody that at least looks like they're putting up a fight. I think Danielle Smith is the person they're going to want to put in there eventually.
Yeah, but I mean, at least one of the millions of reasons why we left, or at least why I left, was because I also did lose faith on the Conservative Party because nothing was ever done. They were going right along with the let's hate on America. This is what makes us Canadian. And Poilievre, well, yes, he has great ideas. He's never really been able to even implement them because he's never really gone in or anywhere.
Yeah, they have great talking points, great populist talking points, but the implementation of those talking points just don't happen. And a lot of crucial conservative issues, they won't even take a stance on because they're scared to lose certain voter blocks.
Yep. It took them a very long time to even acknowledge Billboard Chris's existence, and then they ignored him when I was volunteering with Billboard Chris.
Taking a real run at real conservative values within Canada would even work to go after a lot of immigrants, a lot of especially male immigrants that come in. They come in with natural conservative values, and they're liberalized once they get to the country. Another option needs to be placed there.
Yes. But now let's go back to your comments. Canadian Spider-Man says, how long before we have momentum as far as political leftist views go? I mean, they have all the momentum they need. I think do they need more momentum in Canada? That's all there is.
Well, maybe he misspoke there.
How long before we have the momentum as far as political leftist views go?
I don't know. Okay, let's keep going though.
Or until they start thinking like, oh, that's never going to happen. Holden says, if Alberta stays, all of Canada fails. Separation would force Upper Canada to get to work, sink or swim. And that's why they're so scared, because they don't want to. They want to be able to keep their floaties on.
Yeah, I'm very, very interested in what's going to happen on October 19th. The federal government, Alberta independence is the only threat right now. Everything else, this trade deal, Donald Trump, I think it's all going the way they need for federalization to really have an economic disaster within Canada. So provinces run to the federal government, begging the federal government for a solution, a bailout, and the federal government will be all too pleased to offer a bailout to these provinces for federalization. And once they got that federalization, well, then they're going to have massive amounts of money through natural resources.
Option Trader says Keystone XL is 95% on our side to be built. Option Trader is in the US. On your side, it's about connecting to existing infrastructure that's high-paying union work for Canadians. Why fight it in Alberta?
Yeah, it's kind of complete BS the way the pipes are laid out within Alberta, because no pipe goes directly from Alberta to the United States. They all go through other provinces, and part of that is to implement federal control. Once you have pipelines that go through multiple provinces, it brings federal mechanisms into play, and they've been very strategic not to let Alberta have a pipeline directly to the United States. We need a leader after Danielle Smith that will get in there and demand a pipeline directly from Alberta to the United States, cutting out any other province, and literally just say it's because we do not want to have any federal control over Alberta going forward.
And we already know the US wants that because they've already been approved. Sorry. I'm very bombastic today. Over on our UMBLE, PBE says Canada is an adult daughter lashing out because dad is tightening her allowance. Literally, yeah, exactly. I couldn't have put it better myself. PBE also says, I was a bit harsh and I'm not trying to be offensive, but Canadians are so blinded by decades of lies and anti-American rhetoric. No, but that's exactly it. And for decades now, they haven't been able to even look at the truth or see the truth or be told that what they're doing is self-deletion.
And it's almost all of Canada. There's only a couple holdout provinces, and that is Saskatchewan and Alberta, primarily Alberta. And Alberta is the only one with a real chance to break free at this point. There's still mechanisms in Saskatchewan's way.
And BB also says Canada is dependent on the U.S. No Canadian wants to hear that, but it's the reality. Everything they say is basically, quote, why are you exposing how dependent we are on the U.S. and worst of all, powerless? Exactly because of that. But what they don't realize is as soon as they actually admit and actually work with the U.S. because of the dependence they have on it, lives could improve. But as they continue to hammer down on that point and of hating the U.S. and no, we're not dependent on it, the worse it gets and the more they're going to end up depending on the U.S.
The United States is trying to cut out a lot of the socialism that has been baked into the EU and Canada because they've had room to build these socialist mechanisms because of the success of America and them basically leeching off America for a long time rather than invest in a military or self-sufficiency. They've invested in socialism. So a lot of what Trump is demanding from these countries, the countries don't want to give because they love socialism. What he's offering is self-sufficiency, but self-sufficiency comes with hard work.
Holden says, well said, welcome to the Soviet Union. We all know how that played out. And Option Trader says the Keystone Pipeline already exists and works and goes directly from Alberta into America. The Keystone XL would be a second pipeline directly from Alberta to America.
No, they're actually, it goes from Alberta to Saskatchewan, then into America. And then the XL is going to be an offshoot of the original pipeline. So no, even that will go through Saskatchewan, and just going through that one province adds in a lot of different federal controls and things like that.
And Canadian Spider-Man says, I meant how long before we have the momentum over the left. Oh, okay, got it. I meant how long before we have the momentum over the leftists as far as politics go. After J.D. Vance is in office and we have a conservative leader of a free Alberta, then can we relax with a party?
Well, it's one term. We need one more term. We need a J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio within office after Trump. Trump was able to do a fantastic job in his second term. In his first term, not so much because he had the judiciary kind of freeze him out, but he learned from that over those 4 years. So when he came in this time, man, it was guns a-blazing. But because he only had one real term to work, the globalists are in retreat, but you can see their plan is just to wait Trump out. If they can get a Democrat in there, they're going to be able to reverse a lot of that because he had to rule through executive order because he didn't have the House and the Senate. The thing here is, if we can get a J.D. Vance after Trump, there is no waiting it out. That's the straw that will break the camel's back for the globalist. And that's where we can implement a lot of these executive orders into legislative policy.
But I would also say, I mean, if we can have a party after JD is a leader, until we have a conservative leader of Free Alberta and JD is in office, well, then also we are also seeing an infiltration, kind of, I would say, on the retarded right of a lot of these crazy ideals, wanting to make it into a horseshoe theory and actually take it down from the inside. We're already seeing that in the US. Obviously already happening in Canada, happened a long time ago. But with free and independent Alberta, that would be a very important conservative stronghold that still kind of does mostly, for the most part, remember those fundamental principles and what actually moves them towards being more conservative.
Absolutely. Another thing here is, well, no, we'll leave it.
On that note, the hopelessness note, let's go into Alberta's Canada.
Oh,
yes.
Oh my God, this was the craziest story of the day, maybe of the year, and there's been a lot of crazy stories. This was absolutely insane. This is the direction Canada is headed. If you watch one story, this is the story you need to watch today.
And I really do love Dan Diggs. He is from Vancouver originally, or BC. Dan Diggs says, or lives in BC. Dan Diggs says, quote, "Quebec town declares trees are sentient beings with rights." Now they have rights. Canada's latest absurdity explained. And again, it might not be as absurd if we start thinking about the 30 by 30 plan.
Yeah, and when you have policies like this and these set precedent, and then it sets legislation off of the back of having rights for sentient beings, Canada is a crazy place. And the craziness starts with things like this. And then they expand and expand and expand.
Now there's a universal declaration of tree rights.
Brace yourselves, my friends, because what I'm about to show you is so utterly mind-meltingly insane that you might need to check if you're still living in the real world. This isn't satire. This isn't a late-night comedy sketch. This is real, and it's happening right now. A tiny Quebec town just declared that trees are sentient beings with fundamental rights. Yes, you heard that correctly. Sentient beings with rights. They're calling them sentient. Not just living, but sentient. The same word that we use for beings that feel, experience, and have some form of awareness. Terra Vaudreuil, population of barely 2,000, has become the first municipality in all of Canada to officially sign the Universal Declaration of Tree Rights. Mayor Michael Borteau looked into the camera of history and announced that trees are our biggest ally in the climate war. Listen to the sacred principles that these enlightened leaders just adopted. The tree is a sentient living being and a common good for humanity. Life on Earth depends on the tree, and we mere humans must now act towards the tree in, quote, a spirit of fraternity and solidarity. Fraternity and solidarity with a maple tree? I mean, have you hugged a tree today, my comrades? Have you asked?
Okay, and you can leave it there, but I think that really will have implications because of the crazy climate legislation and policies they implement within Canada.
That they use as mechanisms to actually get other things implemented and other deeper goals to go through. But also it's insane that, okay, trees are sentient beings, no, but sure, whatever. However, babies in the womb and people that continue to get recommended medical assistance and dying even though they don't need it, those are not sentient, or at least they're not as important to be fully protected by second Jabba the Hutt, because that guy looked like Jabba the Hutt.
Well, and one of the big problems here is if you buy land and now they start expanding this policy that trees are sentient beings, you will not be able to clear cut and cut down a lot of these trees to build homes and things like this. There's all kinds of implications when you start recognizing trees as sentient beings, which is absolutely ridiculous, which only a country like Canada would implement. And it's not saying trees aren't important or we shouldn't have a respect for trees, but it's saying trees are useful in a sense to build homes and do a lot of other things with. So when we clear cut trees, we should probably replant them, which is already being done. We don't need to recognize them as sentient beings.
And again, what an insult to children in the womb that get aborted, kids in the womb, and people that get recommended MAID, even though they might not need it. And all they needed was to do more exercise and take a walk every so often.
Well, if they were trees, they would have never lost their lives.
But there is something interesting with trees, and I'm sure that's part of their explanation. I'm trying to make sense of it in my head. But trees do kind of communicate with each other, and they have mechanisms and methods, but that doesn't make them sentient. God. Another insane story. The Bucky Will says, quote, remember, you can't carry a Canadian flag on a flagpole in Parliament Hill, but you can open carry swords and daggers only if you're a very specific person. One will get you arrested, one will make you a Canadian.
And again, no more specialty groups and classes in Canada. That's how we get policies like this. This is absolutely ridiculous. Either everybody can do it or nobody can do it.
That would be a sword. That would be the police. Casually carrying a sword onto Parliament Hill and a dagger. The first gentleman has a sword. The second one has a dagger. Are the weapons going to be allowed then, or? So there's an exemption even for weapons? So the dagger and the sword's both okay on the Hill. So there you have it. Very clearly, different laws in Canada for different people. The weapons will be allowed on Parliament Hill. Another dagger on this guy.
Okay, and you can leave it there. And why is this important? Why is the location important? Because you weren't allowed to have Canadian flags on flagpoles at one point during the truckers' convoy. And now they're just allowing weapons and things like that. And I'm fine with people having weapons as long as it's equal treatment for everybody. Not one specialty groups or class can declare, oh, it's a religious item, so we get an exemption, but nobody else does.
But also with that religious item, Henry Novak's life was taken over in the UK with a Kirpan. So it's not like there's no precedent for them being actually used to attack other people. And yet they can go into Parliament Hill and walk around with them and maybe go talk to Carney with them. CCFR says, quote, RCMP charged man for defending property from repeat offenders. 4 thieves in stolen vehicles attempted to rob a rural property in South Central Manitoba, but were stopped by the 66-year-old property owner armed with a firearm. Based.
Well, and there was another story that just came out recently as well, where there were some home invaders that took the life of the gentleman's son, and then the gentleman was able to disarm the intruder and then use the firearm on him, and then was actually charged.
Yeah,
so
here the
this is ridiculous.
RCMP charged him as well.
Why did RCMP lay charges against the homeowner who, by all accounts, was trying to protect his property?
I think I got to go with the law enforcement on this one. We can have people being judge, jury, and potentially executioner, allegedly.
And frickin' Wob Canoe there. Only the state can defend your home for you.
Yeah. Wait 60 minutes till the patrol can get out to the rural area you're in.
Well, they're going to take your home. They're going to take your private property for you, so then they won't even have to defend it with the police.
Exactly.
A rural Manitoba homeowner is facing charges tonight after confronting a group of suspected thieves caught red-handed on his property.
This is where it all went down late Saturday night on a rural property in the RM of Dufferin. A motion-activated security camera alerted the homeowner when 2 vehicles had entered his property. And when he went to investigate, police say he saw 4 people transferring fuel from a portable container into one of their vehicles, which turned out to be stolen from Saskatchewan. That's when the homeowner, who had a gun, confronted them and fired shots towards both vehicles. 3 of the suspects remained at the scene until Mounties arrived, but the 4th got away in one of the vehicles. And speaking of those vehicles, the one which remained on scene was found to have a number of stolen items from the rural property inside of it.
And pause it for a moment now, because this is going to be absolutely crazy, the stuff they say in response to it. But these were blatant criminals at this point.
RCMP laid charges against the homeowner who, by all accounts, was trying to protect his property.
Well, we asked police that, and here's what they had to say. Canadians may take reasonable steps to protect themselves or their property, but any force used must be reasonable and proportionate in the circumstances, including the nature of the threat. Generally speaking, property owners should prioritize their own safety during these situations and call police rather than confront intruders themselves. And that's a stance Premier Wob Canoe is backing tonight.
I think I got to go with the law enforcement on this one. We can have people being judge, jury, and potentially executioner, allegedly. Though I understand the frustration with crime, absolutely. Support law enforcement. Let's not make their job.
And pause it. It's not about supporting law enforcement here. This isn't a rural area where you're a victim by the time law enforcement gets there. You'll be a victim 10 times over and may have lost your life by the time they get there. This is why firearm ownership is so crucial in rural areas. If you do get a home invasion in a rural area, or even if you have bears or other wild animals, firearm ownership is crucial in Canada. Canada. I can't believe he's saying this. Support the police. The police are incompetent in Canada, and the legislation is absolutely corrupt in many instances.
And they're incompetent because the government itself has mostly made them incompetent by taking away a lot of things that and training that they used to get.
By making the reaction more complicated, I would say.
Ethics professor from the University of Manitoba echoes that, saying people in rural areas are fed up with crime and potentially slower police response times. But Neil MacArthur says the property owner's response didn't match the threat.
In general, what we say is that, ethically speaking, if you are able to protect yourself and you're not in immediate danger, then you certainly don't pursue justice on your own. There's a reason we have a legal system. You know, property...
Which, a legal system which also does catch and release and lets the criminals get away. Oh no, what is resetting?
Okay, you can leave it there. The professor was actually the best reaction of the part, though, but we're having a ton of technical difficulties today.
Yeah, XP loads them now for some reason if they're not working.
So and it's like this professor, this is in theory, this is the way things should be. This is the way the world should be in theory. Yeah, communism in theory is great until you actually implement it, and it's an authoritarian hellhole.
Or until your body is just lying there waiting for the police because you did the right thing and called the police, and now you don't live to tell the tale. Steve Cooner, MLA, says, quote, the NDP just shut down the BC government directory, a basic public resource that has existed since the 1930s. For decades, British Columbians could see the size of the bureaucracy and how their government was structured, but no transparency with the NDP because it doesn't benefit them.
Well, less government transparency is what they want in Canada. And ever since Mark Carney got into power, and I know this is the NDP and not the Liberals, but it seems like they work in conjunction.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the BC government is shutting down public access to the government employee directory, saying RCMP recommended the move amid cybersecurity concerns. Jordan Armstrong is here now with more on the changes and why some say this is fueling transparency concerns. Jordan?
Sophie, for as long as anyone can remember, the government has had a directory allowing the public to see who works in each department along with contact information. Global News used the directory in February to tally up and report to you that the government had 152 ministerial public affairs officers, managers and directors, PR people, whose job it is to push the government line. We checked several provinces to
Okay, and you can leave it there. And something I'll say here is, yeah, this is a lot less government transparency. And even if they don't want to provide a phone number, some kind of email and name is crucially important.
Yes. Sorry, I'm trying to fix the next one. But now let's go back into your comments and then we'll head into Alberta and the world. Obtuse Moose says, isn't that going to make Alberta rich, the Keystone XL pipeline? Yes, but not if it's not done under Alberta's terms. If
Not
it's done
necessarily,
under the
because Alberta is signing its economic sovereignty away through Danielle Smith. She's signing new MOUs for pipelines that don't even have shovels in the ground. And part of what's in those MOUs is retroactive carbon taxes on old pipelines, like the Keystone XL pipeline.
Michael Trader says, guess China became Fern Gully. Yes. And Option Trader says, you're absolutely correct. I'm American. Your provinces make no sense to me.
Well, no, I didn't know either. The reason I was so confident on it, I was looking at the map of the Keystone XL pipeline for the last couple of days, and then I was looking at different federal mechanisms when you run pipelines directly from the province to the United States compared to when you run it from province to another province, and it dramatically changes a lot of different things.
Option Trader says, I think EB is giving land away to prevent a pipeline ever being built across BC from Alberta. Your government wants to lock your oil in and keep you from getting it out.
Yeah, no, there's other reasons as well. He's doing these major land giveaways to First Nations and things like this. It, again, helps with the federalization, because if you get a leader within British Columbia that wants to have resource development, specifically in BC, because it's less about oil and natural gas and pipelines, because everything is self-contained in BC, and there's a lot of mining happening in BC. So they don't have to involve the federal government in any way, shape, or form unless that land is given away, and then the federal government becomes the middleman in the trade deal between the First Nations and the province, federalizing a lot of those natural resources.
Yeah. Canadian Spider-Man says, Canada isn't a real country anymore. Was it ever really? I mean, they have the king, they're part of the Commonwealth, and they rely almost fully on the US and other countries, so...
They had an illusion of it for a long time, but people are starting to see through that illusion. Donald Trump basically threw a rock at the window and it shattered, and people see it now for what it is.
Obtuse Moose asks, can I still smoke them? No. No, because then you get blamed for it and then you get taken to jail while they get probably a job even within the government. Canadians...
Well, yeah, you can, but you just have to bury the bodies and not call the police in Canada, I guess.
Not legal advice. Canadian Spider-Man says people from 100 years ago wouldn't believe us, guy. They just wouldn't believe the world we live in now is true. And they also fought so hard to not make it be this way, and yet here we are.
Yeah, and I was looking in the comments on our last Alberta independence video, and I talked a lot about federalization there as well. And I get a lot of pushback saying, "Oh no, we own the rights in Alberta to this. They've already ceded the land." There's different mechanisms they're building to have workarounds here, and if we don't get our independence now, you're going to slowly see your economic sovereignty be deteriorated as well as your land rights. They're building the mechanisms, they're setting the precedents, and they're having to use different mechanisms within Alberta than they would in BC because the land is ceded, but renegotiation of those contracts aren't out of play here.
A 2.0 says the only ones that think there will be a pipeline is the gullible Daniel Smith and those that continue to support that.
Well, I don't know. I happen to be one of those gullible people that think Mark Carney is going to implement federalization and then go after natural resource development. And that's how he's planning to float this secondary alliance with the EU. The globalists are planning a play to take control of Canada's natural resources and finance their new globalist dreams so they can be a power in a multipolar world, because right now they're not.
Ellie the Free asks or wonders, says, I wonder if they have land acknowledgements for the traditional tribal land of the trees. These people better vacate their houses made out of the corpses of poor victimized trees. Very offensive. Yeah, but the poor ants, we're living in...
Well, it won't be your house anymore, especially if your house is built out of these trees. It's the trees' houses. You're going to have to vacate.
Option Trader asks, you guys couldn't fly your own flag? Wow, Canada isn't a real place anymore. No, you can only fly it if it's under the banner of elbows up. Let's go all Canadian now. And if you're with the Liberals.
No, I think he was talking about at the truckers convoy on the hill. You could fly the flag, you just couldn't fly it on a flagpole.
Option Trader says, you break into my house, you're going to meet God early. The police can take my GUN from my cold, empty hands. God bless America, land of the free, home of the brave.
Absolutely.
And those that can actually do things.
Well, and they have a fighting spirit to them. Anytime I bring up that it might possibly come down to a unilateral declaration of independence, I get a lot of pushback even from Albertans. But after the non-binding referendum, we go into a binding referendum. If Canada doesn't want to allow Alberta to become independent at that point, the only option is a unilateral declaration of independence, and we need to prepare for that moment. And that's why we need a J.D. Vance or a Donald Trump in office, depending how long this process takes.
Yeah. Canadian Spider-Man says, if law enforcement fails to protect us, then the social contract is broken and we are free to defend ourselves with any force needed. But try to argue that in a Canadian court, and I'm sure they won't actually acknowledge that fact. But
well, it's the criminals that are protected in Canada, not the law-abiding citizens and the homeowners.
And again, Canada hasn't been a high-trust society for the longest time now, and it's a third-world country. Time you start accepting it. Canadian Spider-Man says, good, let's all go steal Neil's stuff then. Exactly. And Canoe. Canadian Spider-Man says, Neil, the professor in the interview there. Yeah, Neil and Bob Canoe. Because they both think that, oh yeah, just ask the police to come. Hopefully they come protect and defend them too. A 2.0's in time. A 2.0 says, sharpen up my 6-inch Christian cross. In God we trust, not Canadian immigration.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, if it's a religious item, then it should be fine. Roland Halleck, hello, says, do you think it is legal to tie healthcare to the driver's license? Because I don't.
No, absolutely not. And this is what I talk about, signing the sovereignty away, and Danielle Smith is trying to play both sides here. She wants to make the conservative populist headline, so the non-politically engaged person, she can get that vote, and then she wants to not actually implement the policy when in force or in mass, so she can claim to these specialty groups and classes, yeah, the law was passed, but we didn't implement it. So then she can get both votes or maximize her voter base, which we're not for those kind of politics in Alberta. She needs to go to Ottawa if she wants to play those games.
Because it continues. Roland Halleck says, now they have the expiry date on our health care, so on our health, so we can be ended with no care. Yeah. Michael Drader says, shovel sells for $30. New shovel clip for $200. Brand new shovel, $1,200. 4 perps and a stolen pickup at the bottom of a burning pit. Prices.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Ellie the Free says, gives new meaning to shoot, shovel, and shut up.
Well, I think you want to reverse the order. Shovel, shoot, and then shut up. Make them dig the hole.
I don't like that you have so many ideas. But on that note, let's get into Alberta and the world. Let's start with this from Rise of Alberta saying, quote, GB News put Keith Wilson's case for Alberta independence to the test. If the West already had power in Ottawa, why does Alberta need to leave? And his response reveals why Albertans are no longer asking Ottawa for a better deal.
Well, and it's absolutely fantastic to see Keith Wilson on international media here. We need more international exposure, and I'm sure the Canadian government, as well as Danielle Smith, is going to claim foreign interference. We haven't even been on the Russian media yet, but they're claiming Russian foreign interference. Now they can claim British foreign interference and American foreign interference for being on Glenn Beck as well. Absolutely ridiculous, the federal government, but good to see Keith Wilson on here making the case for independence.
Keith, have we seen this play out before? I mean, a lot of the arguments that you were just saying then are strikingly similar to the arguments that Preston Manning was making in the late 1980s and early 1990s. The Reform Party of Canada, of course, dominant in the West, and went on to, well, a member of the Reform Party of Canada, Stephen Harper, ended up being the Prime Minister of Canada for 10 years. You're not underrepresented. In fact, you led your country.
Well, and it just goes to show that, we were told here in Alberta decades ago, just elect a Conservative government in Ottawa and you will no longer be taken advantage of. You won't have to send $20 or $30 billion extra of your tax dollars to Ottawa and not get them back. We were told that we would get representation and our say would be heard. Preston Manning's motto was the West wants in. Well, we tried all that. We're no further ahead. We still have these incredibly anti-development policies coming out of Ottawa, extreme taxation. The taxation's getting out of control. We've got entrepreneurs and job creators leaving here at record numbers, leaving the country. It's not sustainable. And Albertans are fed up. They want out. We can go it alone. We can redefine our relationship with the rest of Canada. We're the job creators here. All the economic growth in Canada has been in Alberta. We have the third largest reserve of oil. We have other assets that the world wants. It's time for us to set ourselves free and kick the uncle out of the basement that keeps taking our money.
An absolutely fantastic statement, and it really makes me think if Alberta is successful at independence, this is going to send a message to a lot of countries over in Britain. Mainly, I'm thinking Ireland, and Ireland already has a bit of an independence movement, and it constantly is boiling up over there. So hopefully, Alberta independence, if and when it's successful, it sends a message to Ireland. You can be free too.
And also a lot of these, Scotland, a lot of these countries and places where there's been talks of independence, at least a little bit, now can see and point to Alberta and say, hey, it is possible to move forward, and especially if we don't just let up on the gas.
Yeah.
But next, Kirk Liebenmal says, quote, both the Conservatives and Liberals support supply management system that has farmers destroying products instead of reducing pricing and creating direct accessibility for consumers during record food unaffordability. But both Conservatives and Liberals are using Alberta's oil as leverage for voters and status quo.
I absolutely hope Donald Trump destroys supply management in Canada, because it's not real supply management. What it is a bunch of monopolies for the Laurentian elites and the people in Ottawa, because that's where the majority of these monopolies lie.
We believe in standing up for our farmers on this side of the border, including supply managed farmers. We believe that they produce an excellent product. And we don't accept the view that our farmers are at are getting unfair advantages over the United States. If you look south of the border, they're the ones that are doing massive subsidies that create enormous one-sided advantages in their favor. So we think it's time for our Prime Minister to start fighting for our farmers and putting our own producers first.
Yeah, they all want the supply management monopolies protected, and they sent a message to the Conservatives. That's why Pierre Poilievre has that stance. He knows it's not a popular stance, but they sent that message through Maxime Bernier because he stood up against it at the time. He was supposed to be the natural successor in the line, and when he went against that supply management, they absolutely destroyed his career.
But also, if your industry cannot, and you're not allowing your industry to kind of hold up on itself, at least partially, and at least compete in the market and try to find ways to get better, you're number one, getting closer to communism, but you're also not letting the farmers and entrepreneurs and et cetera actually get better at what they do and be competitive.
Well, on top of that, they're hindering benefits to the Canadian public. When they go over their quotas, they're forced to dump out the milk. They're forced to destroy the grain and the food and things like that. Just put it on the open market or give it to food banks, for frick's sakes. Yes. Canadians are struggling like never before.
Exactly. But next, Rebel News says, quote, watch Daniel Smith reminding a Punjabi TV Omni host that international students have no guaranteed path to permanent residency or citizenship. Should have been more clear maybe beforehand.
Well, she'll give this statement here, and then she'll put her on her Halloween costume and go right to the Punjabi meetup and give a completely different message to the crowd. She plays both sides here. There is no implementation of a lot of the policies that she says. She likes to have words that make headlines.
Premier, what is your message to the international students of facing status reviews and uncertainty about their future?
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate that there wasn't clarity. When people come as international students, there isn't always a pathway to become a permanent resident and a citizen of Canada. Sometimes the education is to be able to improve skills so that a person can go home and be able to get a good job back in their home country. And so I know that we have to make sure that when people come to Canada and come to Alberta, that there's a good paying job for them. That the best measure of success is that if somebody has a good paying job that can then ultimately allow for them to apply for permanent resident status and ultimately become a citizen, that's the pathway we want to support. But the federal government under Justin Trudeau just made too many of those streams too widely available. There aren't enough jobs for everybody who is seeking one, and not everyone, sadly, is going to be able to stay. So I hope that there's a way for as many people as possible.
Okay, and you can leave it there. And you notice how she says jobs, jobs, jobs. As long as there's jobs, we can have as much mass immigration as we want. And Alberta is booming right now. And in 2027, 2028, Mark Carney is opening up the floodgates. There's all kinds of jobs in Alberta. Where do you think those immigrants are going to go? How do you think they're going to vote in a binding referendum if they're fast-tracked from PR status to citizenship? You really have to be aware of this. She's not trying to stop mass immigration in any way, shape, or form, much like she's not trying to actually implement a lot of these policies that she makes headlines on that we all agree with, but she never has the real hard implementation of them.
But also during her little press conference with Mark Carney, also reversed a lot of the things she said she wanted to do regarding immigration and saying, yes, we do need more immigration. We want to increase the number up to X 6,000 and more amounts. And also putting the question on the non-binding, this upcoming referendum on October 19th, when she was already voted in under the perception that she was going to do something about it.
Yeah, well, she flooded the ballot with 9 other questions. A lot of those have to do with immigration, and she's already talking about more mass immigration in her other interview that we kind of showed on the last episode. Go ahead.
Yes. But now let's look at the contrast. Here from Gen Xer says, quote, Mexico swallowed the insults, Canada performed them. That's the whole file. Mexico's economy minister says about 85% of their exports still enter the U.S. tariff-free. They sat through 3 rounds of talks in July. 4th round is already booked for September. Canada got the cowboy hat.
Stop for a moment. You can continue in a moment. But yeah, all 3 rounds, and these had daily reports of everything they discussed. These weren't 45-minute or 1-hour meetings. These were actually negotiation talks, official negotiation talks, which Canada, again, still isn't in. Now, if you watch the mainstream media and even independent media in Canada, I don't think are aware of this fact. They're not in official talks. That's why every time they talk to them, it's 45 minutes to an hour if you watch the news and they report on the length of time of these negotiations. Non-official negotiations are treated much different than official negotiations.
Yeah, Canada got the cowboy hat, the pancake flip, the Italy vacation, and the, quote, elbows up ads. Then Trump put a 50% tariff on the table, covering about $20 billion in Canadian goods, dairy, alcohol, hundreds of other lines. Mexico kept market access, and Canada got a deadline. Carney ran as the only man who could take on Trump. Then he tweeted, the biggest customer we have, like a campaign slogan. You don't win a trade war with a press conference, you win it at the table. And Mexico understood that, while Ottawa still thinks performance is the job.
And the most important difference between the Mexicans and the Canadians is the Mexicans decided to go into official negotiations and baked in a stop into those negotiations, meaning they didn't have to worry about a threat of a future tariff as long as they were in those official negotiations. Canada chose the opposite route, not to enter into official negotiations, which left them opened to tariff threats like we've seen just happen. And in response, Mark Carney basically gave up all the leverage they would have if they went into an official negotiation.
While crying victim and saying, oh,
Yeah.
poor us, elbows up. We have to fight against the U.S. like that idiot was saying.
And sometimes we have other content creators watching. Hopefully people really start pointing out the difference between the Mexico strategy and the Canadian strategy.
And again, especially as a Mexican, this isn't to rah-rah the Mexican government, and much less Claudia Sheinbaum, an insane leftist ideologue. But the fact that Mexico was able to do this, Mexico understood this, even as they were at first trying to do their whole sovereignty talk as well, and then realized, no, it's more convenient for us and our people to actually sit down and do the thing, makes Canada look even worse. That Canada did even worse than Mexico.
And again, Claudia
Third world
Sheinbaum is
country.
not a good leader. She's a far left ideologue, extremely woke policies. But when it came to this one thing that would dictate the future of the country, I have to give her credit. She did extremely well with it.
Yeah. It wasn't mainly her. But
Well, and she did even more well with it because you can look at a compare and contrast with Canada right now.
But now let's go back to your comments. Roland Halleck says, we were not asked to come in, so we don't need to leave. So we don't need them to leave. Yeah, you don't need us to leave either.
Yeah, that would be nice if it was that easy.
Yeah. Up to Smooth says, I got a heat pump to sell you. And Holden says, Canada was exposed as a failed nation. When Canada was exposed as a failed nation, it's when the convoy showed the world. Yeah,
Yeah, I got a heat pump and a carbon sucking machine to sell you, actually.
that's it. And a bunch of fires because you don't manage your forests. Up to Smooth says, great show tonight. Thank you. And thank you for being here too. Roland Halleck says, Alberta is bigger than England.
Alberta is absolutely huge. Every province in Canada is absolutely huge. It's more than big enough to be its own independent country. And most of the provinces have enough natural resources, if they would develop them, to be very successful countries on their own, especially because of their proximity to the United States. Every province already trades more with the United States than they do with each other.
Yeah. Campanjelli, hello, says Alberta Prosperity Project has their constitution on download. Should get a copy.
Oh,
thank you.
absolutely. Yeah, I was talking about that the other day as well.
And Roland Halleck says we are being replaced. Yes, and sadly, most people are just clapping and welcoming everybody else, the invasion in.
Well, you're being
not even
replaced,
fighting.
but there is a little bit of a reprieve right now for Alberta because the immigration isn't at its peaks and Alberta's not being absolutely flooded like it was for a few years, and it's going to be again in 2027 and 2028. It's a special little moment where we get to take the vote, and we haven't been replaced yet. So if we don't want to be replaced, we need to vote for independence.
Yes, over in Ariane Bailey, PB says that's the root center of these shenanigans. Canada is dependent and powerless to change anything and at the mercy of the U.S., and nobody wants to admit that, but the numbers tell the truth. And the inability to actually do anything show the incompetence too, and the third worldness. PB says Wobbly Canoe can talk as tough as he likes, but he's powerless to do anything. But empty tough talk wins elections in Canada as long as it's anti-American, because they've been trained with like a Pavlovian instinct to vote for anybody that hates on the U.S.
Not anymore. These premiers actually have a lot of power, especially if, again, it's a bit of a conspiracy theory, but if Carney comes back, says, I have a deal, and one premier, because they talk behind closed doors and they strategize, I want you to kill the deal by not taking the booze off the shelves or doing something to sabotage the deal, this will make an economic spiral for Canada, force provinces to go to the federal government asking for bailouts. The federal government's response will be federalization for bailouts. And that's how you get federalization in Canada.
PB says, I look at numbers, nothing else matters. This was always going to be heavily in America's favor and always will be. When these people constantly attack America, how do they expect negotiations to fare? Well, they think it helps and it makes them look tough because they're not tough.
The globalist countries really hate America right now because they're not getting preferred status anymore. But a lot of countries that have a conservative ideology, like Argentina and other places, like Hungary did under Viktor Orban, had preferential treatment. If you can get a leader on there that's more ideologically in line with Trump, you could probably easily get preferential treatment again. Somebody that would invest in the natural resources, develop those natural resources, and agree to trade those to the United States. It wouldn't be hard. The problem here is it's almost impossible to get a conservative into power in Canada at this point.
Yeah. Hello, Christo says, Good Friday, dears. Alberta independence. go. Yes, let's go. And Cape for you also, hello and thank you for being here. And hold on, we have one more here on YouTube and then we'll head over to RUMBLE. Option Trader says, I can't believe how Canadians forgot how Trudeau treated your trucker convoy, pure communism. And that's on purpose too. I mean, it was on purpose to make the public forget about it, but also to turn the public against their fellow citizens and to cheer for the government.
Well, the fact that that people even recognize the trucker convoy and it had that much success, because when it comes to the jibby jab and everything else, people still don't believe in that in Canada. They think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. They're still getting their jibby jabs 2, 3, 4 times a year. It's absolutely ridiculous.
I mean, the level of control, of how controlled the population is another reason why we decided
the people that do remember the trucker convoy, there is I would say, a lot of people that do remember within Alberta and Saskatchewan, and this is where these independence movements are right now.
But thank you so much for joining us here on YouTube. The show is not over. There's still some spicy stories over on RUMBLE. You can find our username here. Before we go over there, please don't forget to subscribe. Again, it is what helps us out the most. And also, thank you so much to everybody that sent messages, comments, but also Steve Safaro for all the super chats. Thank you so much. We'll see you there in 30 seconds.
Let's get ready to